Welcome, welcome, welcome to this edition of Sagionic 1027. We're so glad that you decided to join us today. And with us, I have one of those special guest again, and I'm so excited to introduce you to him. But before I introduce you to our guest, I want to tell you a little bit about our program. So, the word Sagionic means movement by movement in time. The word Sagion singular means carriers of wisdom. Both words are Greek. I'm blood Greek, and so it makes it all the more special. So today's guest is Ryan Hoppus, and he is a man, and I was thinking, how could I personally explain him? And here's what I came up with. He's a man who has chosen to leverage the what I'm going to classify as genius intelligence in his mind on a level, like to level out his mind instead of keeping his mind confined, because you cannot keep light confined. Anytime you turn on, even if you turn on a match in the darkness, that match will change the atmosphere from dark to light or lightened. And so that's how I explain my brother Ryan, who I had an opportunity to meet last year while I was on an assignment. Just heard a little bit about him. And then I did me, which was to cover people in prayer and just continuing to ask the Lord to bless them. So Ryan Hoppus, today's program is all about you, and you are a carrier of wisdom, and what insights that you think people should know or could know or would be beneficial to know to help them to accomplish their dreams or their purposes in life. So how would you like to get started today?
Wow. Well, that was an overwhelming compliment there. Genius, huh?
Yeah,
There's probably too much credit given there. But yeah, I mean, I think that you had some questions that you listed out. I
I
mean,
did.
I
And
haven't been
and
able to watch too many of these, and I'm glad we're syncing up. I mean, you and I have probably connected 100 times to get to this point
yeah,
since
but
we met
see,
in Hermiston, right? We were
yes,
in
that's right.
Hermiston.
That's right.
We met up there on the mountain as we were praying over the city before the festival, and that was a really
Yes.
cool moment for sure. And then we kind of
Yeah.
talked on the way down, and you had been in Pakistan, and I was bummed I didn't get to go to Pakistan. Maybe Iraq this year, which will be awesome. But
Okay. You
um,
will. You will. Because if it's
ah,
been put in, no, because if it's been put in your mind, it's been put in your mind for a purpose, right? And
yeah, but
so,
I'm married and happy wife, happy life, and there's
yeah,
certain
yeah.
places that
But you know what? It could be the whole family, and you could wind up developing friendships there that would be
absolutely,
lifelong friendships, you know?
absolutely.
Um, I mean, anything is possible. Surprise, I never go strictly off the questions are merely to get people's thinking, right? Get
Sure.
them, just pull up information out of them. And so for me and for our viewers, is what's eminent is that what is that pressing thing on your mind? When you walk into a room and you see somebody discouraged because, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So when you run into somebody that's in business and they keep trying to make it work, make it work, make it work, and they can't figure out how to make it work, share some of the wisdom insights that you would share with that business owner?
Jeez. You know, at a high level, one of my biggest I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a fault or not
Okay.
because I sleep really good at night.
Okay.
Is I don't spend a ton of time reflecting.
Okay.
When someone asks me like, how did you get from point A to point B to point C? It's kind of like I don't know. I remember there was a lot of long nights and there was a lot of hard work, but being able to go back and write the recipe of how to get there. I think a lot of people are always looking for some complex thing, some difficult steps, and to me, I don't know if it becomes a natural gift, but it's not as complicated as a lot of people make it, at least from my perspective. Businesses, there's not a lot of differences between your life and business.
Uh-huh.
Um, in all the businesses that I run, the relationships are probably more key than anything. So usually when I see someone struggling, they're not finding the relationships, they're not creating the personal ties, they're not creating a service that adds value to their customers more than anything. So to me, a lot of our growth, I left Intel geez, almost what, in 2010, so 13 years ago.
Okay.
And the beginning of our business had everything to do with relationships that I had gained over the 15 years that I worked at Intel. It wasn't that we had a product that was way better, a product that was so different than anyone else. I mean, it was a service business that we started, and it was 100% to do with relationships, being reliable, being someone that's dependable, all of those kind of things that relationships outside of work in your personal life are, those traits are what create those relationships. So to me, business isn't as complex as a lot of books seem to make it seem. It's relationships, it's trying to look ahead a little bit further, and you follow your intuition, have confidence in what you're seeing, those type of things. So if I see someone struggling, it's sitting down there and trying to help them build the relationships within the business space that they're working.
That's really good. And you know what it also makes me think of is that you cannot entertain personal doubt. Because if you entertain personal doubt, then you're truly not functioning in how it is that you're created. And we're wired for success, right? We are automatically wired for success. It's our own choices to partner with human doubt that prohibits us from moving forward. But it's a choice to partner with human doubt. And, I interviewed a gentleman, and he said the same thing as far as whatever field he was in, and he used the backdrop of, he was part of a community church or whatever, and he got to know every single man, the ins and outs. Not that he was stalking them or anything, right? But got to know the people. Well, that launched him to know people. Right? Not, let me hurry up and get there. Let me find out something about them really, really quick, so I can get their contact information. Right? And so can you, because I know you're in more than one venue, right? Because you've chosen to partner with wisdom. So share the beginning thoughts of when a new venture came into your mental parameter and you chose to grab a hold of it and walk forward. Give us an example how you learned to partner with that.
Sure. Again, there's no, magic formula here. I worked at Intel for 15 years.
Okay.
And their walls are gray. Their cubicles are gray. They use PowerPoint a lot. They use spreadsheets a lot. You end up in, 9 hours of meetings a day, and then you go home and do your real work, and you travel a ton. And I was like, wow, okay. I'm going to be really glad I was from Intel. I learned a ton. It was a great experience. But it was just the walls were suffocating me in becoming creative, being innovative. The opportunity for risk wasn't there.
Okay.
I always see, when I decided to leave Intel, I was pretty high up in the ranks, and a lot of people saw my job as, oh, you're very safe. Why would you ever leave that safety net? Why would you ever, take the risk? I didn't necessarily have doubters, but I had people saying wait, why are you taking this risk? And, the experience in my life, whether it's in your personal life, you got to find a way to be uncomfortable to see that growth. You need to take risk to have unproportional results in your life. Whether it's in business, whether it's snowboarding down the mountain, right? If I'm not falling, well, anymore at my age, probably not falling. But when I was learning, it's if I'm not falling, I'm not learning. In business, if I'm not taking a risk, I'm never going to see that exponential growth. In my personal life, if I want, you and I met through a hobby that I've invested in. If I didn't take the risk within that hobby, I wouldn't have ended up where I was. You had to become uncomfortable. And to me, I was at a point in my life, I was still young. I was in my mid-30s, and I'm like, man, I want more than to travel the world and sit in meetings all day. I want to try this entrepreneurial thing. And so to me, it was just a jump away from the confines of the inability to take risk. And I even remember within Intel, there was times where I was trying to take risks. I moved my entire family's up here in Portland, Oregon, and I decided to move down to San Diego, where I didn't have any family. I had no friends, and family and friends are crucial to me. So that was a bigger risk than, just it sounded like moving to wonderful San Diego. And I remember really kind of going through the positive and negatives of a decision, right? And this could be in business or anything where you're weighing the wins. this decision is going to be a positive or negative. And you come up with this whole list. And I think people then get stuck in that list creating, what are the positives, what are the negatives. And, someone said to me, there's not win decisions and lose decisions. There's bad decisions, sure. But I'm kind of, people get to the point to where it's like 1A and 1B, and they sit there analyzing for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the decision's irrelevant. I mean, it's what you do for the next 6 months after you make the decision that's going to allow you to say that was a good decision or bad decision. So to me, like, what was it? It was like sitting there and saying, you know what? I don't care about the positive and negatives of the decision. This is a decision that's going to allow me to take risk, and I will either make it a good decision or a bad decision based upon what I do over the next X number of years. And so far, it's been the best decision of my life to leave the confines of big business and have the ability to take risks, be creative, develop new entities, and all that.
So would you also say that it's important to not slander what taught you different business principles? Because if you were in the confines of a structured position,
Absolutely.
right, that is the position. So it's kind of futile to slander it when they're paying for that position, right? So I like what you said, that you chose to leave that because you wanted to go past the top of what that position, in essence, allowed you to do, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Without that 15 years prior to that, I wouldn't have had any of the tools that required of me technically within the job to be successful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of safer spaces, that allow you to be creative and learn lessons. But again, like at Intel, it wasn't a place that you were going to take individual risks at a high level. There was structures around that. But yeah, Intel was the greatest. I started working there right out of high school. Absolutely loved my time there. Built so many great relationships that I still have today. But yeah, different times of your life, there's different opportunities and functions and structures that are in place that are valuable. And as we grow, sometimes those change.
That's right. And if you think of the list, right, we have one of two choices. And this is my opinion. My personal opinion is there's no competition and there's no such thing as failure. Okay? I say there's no competition because when you are working in a spirit of excellency, right, you are doing the very best you can. There are going to be people who are drawn to your product, your services, what your company is offering. And then there's people who are going to be drawn to somebody else's. It could be, where the holes, HOLES, are geographically placed in a product, right? Or where they're not. The color, right? The feeling, the texture. All these things play a role. So what would you say about, somebody who is like, oh, I'm afraid to fail?
Wow. To me, if you would ask me like where some of my success came from, it was a competitiveness. It was, I don't like failing. I don't like, not that I never fail. I fail all the freaking time, but it's, I feel like there are failures that I learn from. Okay. Then you may then turn around and say like, well, there's no failure. It was just an opportunity to grow. Sure. Yes. Tomato, right? In competitiveness, on the other hand, is I love it because it does drive me to be. It doesn't allow me to sleep, right? In the sense of like stop thinking, stop moving forward. There's a continual push because I feel like there's this competitive nature. But I also get what you're saying, that once you get into the marketplace, the world is huge.
Yeah.
There's enough opportunities for everyone to win. So maybe that competition is more self-created and self-driven more than there is this, direct competition of there's only one winner and one loser.
Yes, that's exactly what I was saying. Because I there is nothing in me that can quit. Okay, I can't. If I'm placed with an assignment, I'm going to go all the way, not backing down, right? Even down to, I was called to a boardroom on who I classify as father, son, and corporate. Shawn, come to the boardroom with me. Well, who is not going to say yes to that? And I did. And so Sagionic 1027 was birthed, right? And I'm like, what do I have access to that's different than nobody else in the entire world can have a particular thing that I have? And it's my backdrop, a piece of art that my brother did. Nobody on earth has this backdrop but me. Right. And so the competitive drive, yes. But as far as products and services, right, you got gas stations and, if you go to Cali, you're in California, right? There's donut shops on every corner. Why would they have donut shops on every corner where you could go to the beach? Yet the drive was there, right? So share, like literally break down on, what does somebody do when this thought comes their direction on, and it's something new and they haven't seen it on the market. How do you partner with that initial thought? Aside from the pros and the cons, you haven't done anything with your hands yet. You just got your mind. And this thought bounces your direction. And there's a light bulb with that thought that says, this could be done. What do you do with it?
Sure. Most of my businesses are service business. We have a few product businesses, but at the end of the day, I think having the idea and then having the confidence. I feel like a lot of people don't have the confidence in themselves and their ideas to push them forward. At the end of the day, a lot of times I'll meet people and they have a great idea, and they just struggle on taking that first step. And I don't know if it's because of a comfort, they're scared of the risk. I don't know what it is necessarily, but I would just go back to that, having confidence in yourself and pushing forward and taking the first step. Momentum is an incredible thing, right? Before that, breaking through that inertia takes a lot of gumption. It takes the ability to jump into risk. And usually that risk is not as big as you internalize it at the inertia point. But once you break through that inertia and you get momentum, you start going. The one thing I would probably say that's kind of in this vein, but a little bit different than where you're going, is that I feel like people have ideas a lot of times and they put, I would say, like horse blinders on. And they see that idea and they go towards that idea. And as new data presents itself, or new opportunities that may not even be something you considered at the beginning, but because you started the momentum, you broke through that inertia, you're moving towards your idea, and all of a sudden a whole nother opportunity opens themselves. I see a lot of people say, no, that's not my 10-year goal. That's not my project. And they keep the horse blinders on. And a lot of times I see people fail at the end because their initial idea and what the market needed or the opportunities presented themselves was a derivative or two from what their idea was. So I think of like the businesses we've started and we own, they weren't, the business that exists today was not the business we thought of when we started. So a lot of times it was, hey, we're going to go do A, B, and C. And then we see, wow, there's D, E, and F over to our right. Okay, let's go do that because there's someone that's willing to part for money for that service or product. We talk to a lot of people of, especially in the service space, like they have a product, but the service is almost something like, well, we don't want to be, we want to build the product. We don't want to be the service folks. And we're like, yeah, but there's really good margin. Okay, we'll go do that. And 5 years later, they don't exist and we have a successful business. So, having an idea, breaking through that inertia, developing momentum, which will carry you further than you probably think at the beginning. That risk is probably not as large as you think it is at the beginning. And then, taking the horse blinders off and being willing to shift your strategy or your vision as new data presents itself. Not being so prideful that the idea you had at the beginning is the exact idea that needs to happen.
That's really good. That's really good. And it makes me think of, I interviewed a little bit ago. I'm not getting paid for many of these promotions, I have to say this. But this is called the Monday Morning Christian, and it's by Howard Partridge. Okay, and Howard Partridge, his company is the #1 coaching system for the Zig Ziglar Foundation. Okay, he was in the initial groundbreaking of John Maxwell, and he got invited to a board meeting, so he was the original board member in there, right? But one thing and it's not so much as being a Christian as much as it's principles. It's just founding principles. One of the things in there that he shares is an FTI, and that's called the failure to implement, right? Or to walk out or to put to practice what it is that you're trying to, whether it be, dialing in, and you basically just shared that failure to implement.
Sure.
I think it's important though that when new information presents itself, just as in nature is continually changing, right? It's continually changing and evolving because it has to, because it was created that way. Well, why would you want to stay a little peon all to yourself if other brains were coming into your parameter that had more ideals that could enlarge your project that you were currently working on?
Absolutely.
So can you share with our viewers how, when being brought into contact with others, how that has actually benefited you? Because you haven't attained to the level of success where you are now only by me, myself, and I.
For sure. For sure. Um, Man, I think we partnered with a dental technology company that we now own a majority share in, and I remember that um, they had some really good products, really good ideas, some really good IP, patented, but they hadn't gotten it to kind of a business aspect yet. And I remember very early on thinking, man, these guys are clueless when it comes to business, but they seem really smart in their vertical of these dental products. And I remember engaging with them, and 2 or 3 years later, it's like, wow, there's a lot of really unique ideas that I didn't think of. The way maybe I didn't hear them right, or they weren't communicating them correctly. But some of their business principles are now ones that we implement across our different business units. So being willing to at least humble yourself to the point to where you don't know. I don't feel like I know much of anything. I feel as if there's a lot of dumb luck in ending up where I'm ending up. I took the risk, I invested the time, I invested the energy, I built relationships, but there's a lot of dumb luck that probably that happened along the way to put me where I am. And so there's very few times I step into a situation where my first instinct isn't to think I figured out the answers as much as it is to seek to understand what the other person's saying. I try to do that a lot. I make the initial assumption that if someone's saying something that I feel is like, where's that coming from? Okay, it's me that doesn't get it. So let's seek to understand, because everyone has something to bring to the table. The diversity of ideas are insane out there, and if you're not willing to be a sponge and learn from other people, even if they haven't experienced the success you have or haven't, it's just being open for those ideas and seeking to understand from other people is key.
So
Yeah.
ask the questions. Ask the questions, right?
Yeah.
To humble yourself to ask the questions, because if you come into contact with somebody who has concepts and is verbally communicating to you concepts that you're like, the light goes off in your head, like, wow, what's that, right? To ask the questions, because then that person's going to open up their carriers of wisdom self
For sure.
to share with somebody else, because it's no good if you keep something to yourself. If you just keep it to yourself, you're just bouncing off your own brain, right?
Absolutely.
So now we're going to jump a different direction. Okay, we're going to jump the direction of hiring people. And how is it that leaders were grown? How have you seen leaders choose to grow? What kind of principles did they partner with that inevitably resulted in them becoming leaders of different places in your companies?
Sure. Yeah, I'd say most of the leaders that we have are ones that I had past relationships with.
Okay.
And had worked with before. And I would say that the traits weren't necessarily technical traits that led me to bring them into the team and promote them into leaders within the organization. It was, again, goes back to relationships.
Okay.
Relational. Not necessarily people I always agreed with,
Yeah.
but people that had a good work ethic, people that were willing to, like we just said before, is humble themselves to a point to where they're seeking to understand from their peers and each other more than they are trying to convince people of their ideas or their thoughts or directions or strategies, right? It was not that you're never confident in a direction that you think or that you wouldn't put your opinion on the table. But the first step is not to go argue your opinion. The first step is to listen and seek to understand. So it had way more to do with relational skills and capabilities than anything else. And I have seen over time that, yeah, I mean, with time, those skills become stronger. But a lot of times people have those as innate skills, or they don't. It's rarely have I seen someone that doesn't have the ability to have strong relationships, that aren't willing to seek down, that 10 years later they're like, wow, that was a huge weakness and now that's a huge strength. I'm sure that there's examples of it, but the leaders that I brought in had way more of those just innate skills of relational, seek to understand, slow to anger for sure, being able to handle stress really well, being okay with dynamic situations without all the data, willing to make a decision without having every data point, so that you can, and then make it the right decision after you've made the decision. It's those things we've talked about up to this point that you're looking for, not necessarily are they the smartest technical, because I've seen people grow technically. We've all grown technically. We all went to school and learned something we didn't know before. But personalities are tough to change. Personalities are difficult. Relational elements are tough to improve. Not that they can't be. You see it rarely compared to picking up a technical skill.
Yeah, that's good. And I just saw a visual. And what was that thing called? I want to say it was called I don't think it's a stenograph, but on a piece of paper, there was this device put, and there was a pencil on it, and you would move it around like this.
Mm-hmm. You make
Okay.
a
What was that
design,
called? What was that called?
I don't know. I had one as a kid. You had the
Okay.
different discs
Yep,
with the
yep,
different
yep, yep.
pencil holes.
So this is what I'm seeing, right? It was point to point, point to point, point to point, point to point, and all of these, from A to B, A to B, A to B, A to B, because that little thing would make lines, right? And then after you continue to do it so long, it actually created a new design, right?
sure.
But if you didn't do A to B, A to B, A to B, A to B, it's kind of like if you were to go into a room and you think me, myself, and I, instead of, we think of how to win friends and influence people, right? Are you going to go into a
For sure.
room to try to, how can you, what I classify it as love on people, right? How can you go into a room and love on this person, love on this person, love on this person, or encourage this person, and because it's what it does is it opens a person up. It opens them up so you get to hear a little bit about them, and they're naturally going to tell you about themselves, and so, and even, so now share with us how through different business projects that you've done, okay, I could almost be convinced you're going to say the same thing as everybody else says, is that your biggest negative voice could potentially be you, but you've snuffed that out already, okay? I want you to go back, and I want you to share with us one of the toughest learning spaces in life that could have had the potential to do away with you.
Wow.
But you don't have to go too deep, because we want to keep your life a little private there. Just that
no.
you just thought, oh man, I'm done for.
Man, there's probably been a few. I think probably the largest one was in the time it would have been early 2000s, right before I moved to San Diego. I went through a divorce.
Okay.
And luckily there was no kids involved. It was basically a breakup that we had to tell the state about. And it was one of those times where your emotional and your willingness to take risks, you wanted to find the safety net.
Yeah.
And I think that was about the time that I ended up making the decision to move to San Diego, to just basically create a new environment surrounding me, And I think if I wouldn't have made that decision, I would have probably been in a pretty dark space for a long time. Because I would have been surrounded by enough things that I was comfortable with that would have just been distractions and things that weren't positive for me. Moving to San Diego where I didn't know anyone, there was no distractions. I could just dump myself into work, working out, my health. It was definitely an opportunity to just isolate myself in a way and focus on myself and invest in myself. And I kind of think that if I wouldn't have done that at that time, I could have made a lot more poor decisions if I would have stayed home. And the funny thing is, we relocated down there, and then the team got shut down. Not shut down, but we moved it back to Oregon. So I moved from Oregon to San Diego, and 9 months later, they transferred us back up to Oregon. So it was such a blessing to basically take that risk to move down there, which was huge for my career, huge for me personally. And then I was brought right back to my family and friends with a totally different mindset, a totally different focus. So I think that if I wouldn't have put myself out there, if I wouldn't have taken the risk, if I wouldn't have invested in myself during that time, it would have probably been a different scenario, a different story than the trajectory I'm on now.
That's good. So in essence, we could word it a lot of different ways. A reset. You
Mm-hmm.
recentered yourself. You
Oh, for
refocused,
sure.
right?
For sure.
You honed in on, repairing wounds, right? Which
For sure.
all these things are vital. To give yourself the space for whatever it may be. It could be, because good Lord Jesus, you are not the only person on earth to have gotten a divorce, right?
For
We could
sure.
have our
Yeah.
audience raise their hand and say, yes, I've
For
had to
sure.
go through one of those healing things.
Yep.
But, you know, I would have to say that, think of how, in my life, I can say how I've gone back to try to see where the other person was coming from, right? Where were they coming from, and what could have led up to where they were coming from? Could be their upbringing. It could have been,
For sure.
circumstantial situation that happened in their life, and you know, like for any of our viewers who have had to go through a divorce or whatever, what kind of words of encouragement would you speak over them?
Oh man, I'm probably not the right person for
Oh,
this.
come
This went from
on.
this went from business to personal, real
But
quick.
but you can't separate them,
Oh, for sure, for
because
sure.
if you don't have your stuff together behind the scene, how are you going to show up to run the corporation?
We say a leaky bucket at work is a leaky bucket at home, for sure, right? It doesn't all of a sudden repair itself. Um, no, absolutely. The funny thing is, I'm working through a coaching element. One of my good friends is just a stellar business coach, and
Okay.
one of our employees is going through like a stud employee that is going to add so much value, but he's coming from a non-leadership kind of role, and we're putting him into a leadership role, and there's some gaps there, and we're investing heavily in him. And I was talking to the coach, and I'm like, man, this is going to fix his marriage too. He's like, yep. um I the thing is I had, you spoke a little bit about understanding where other people come from, and I
Yeah.
talked about seeking to understand, and looking at that scenario. There was never any hatred.
Yeah.
I didn't in I was definitely wronged in this situation. It was something that I could have carried a lot of hatred and a lot of frustration and a lot of anger. Not that I didn't go through those stages, but they were very short-lived
Yeah.
and very
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
Because as a man of faith, I know holding on to grudges and holding on to that is more impactful to me than anyone else. And I think moving on as quickly as possible, doing that recentering, investing in yourself and repairing those wounds and getting ready to, move on, without that hatred and without that frustration is the only thing that's what got me through it so quickly in a positive way. Yeah, it was one of those failures, I guess, that you didn't turn into a failure, but you turned into something you learned from. And
Uh-huh.
looking
Uh-huh.
back at it, where my life is now, it's all blessings.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
no,
But it was a choice. It was a choice.
for sure, for
You
sure,
had to make a choice. In my opinion, the only thing we have absolute control of in life is what happens inside of your mind.
absolutely.
Nothing else. Nothing else. And you alluded to something that, so here's another fun book I like, Switch on Your Brain by Dr. Caroline Leaf. Okay. Nope. Not getting paid for any of this. These are just books that I've read. But one thing that she has spoken about, I don't know if you know of her, but neuropsychologist, right? Studied neuropsychology for 25 years, clinical, and then has now traveled around the world for pushing 20 years. But
Okay.
one thing she says is that neurologically speaking, if a person is in a space of rage, it is like an inferno inside of their brain, frying, destroying brain cells. And when I read that, and when I saw it on a video, I'm like, oh, I do not want to stay in an anger state long at all,
Oh,
because
for
then I'm going to
sure.
fry my brain. So then it's like something happened. It's like, okay, calm down, Shawn. Work through this. Quick, 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 quick. You got to hurry up and move past this. It can't be frying the brain cells, right?
For sure.
And so, it's inevitable in business that frustration would come up. So what's a mini, countdown, like take it down a notch, take it down a notch. Ryan, take it down a notch, take it down a notch. What is your own self-talk on how to, be an even-killed businessman?
Man, maturity has definitely changed that. There was definitely more highs and lows as I was younger than there is now. There's very little frustration that in terms of at least the peaks and valleys that I feel anymore.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing for me was just the awareness of those differences. If I drive into work and someone cuts me off and I feel that anger, I go in the office realizing, you know what, my EQ might be a little lower right now. And so just that awareness of your emotional intelligence in different scenarios. I, Man, it is so hard to change the initial reaction to things, right? I struggle with it a ton. You'll get quick to frustration, even if it doesn't come out, external and no one knows about it. But internally, like my initial reactions happen so quick, and I don't know. I'm working on it. But I think that one of the improvements over the years is that I'm more aware that I'm feeling that way. Where when I was younger, you just kind of rolled with it and it just was your state and you weren't necessarily, I don't know. It's kind of like I'm watching a sitcom outside my body, like I'm watching this character go through that, but I'm aware that they're going through it. And I found, I've become better at shutting my mouth when I know my EQ is low. I'm sure I still fail at it, but yes, what I would love to do is not have that reaction so quickly and be able to kind of process it and prioritize it and do all the things that we should probably do before we have that reaction. But at least I'm at the state where the reaction it's a little more internal than it used to be.
That's pretty good, because I interviewed a gal a while back, and she said that her children began to notice, Mom, you're wearing your thoughts on your face. She goes, is that outside of my face right now? Right? And she called it a face check. A face check. Yeah. You better check your face, check your face, check your face, check your face.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all articulate thoughts different, even situations. Some, like if a person gets up and says, I don't know, oh gosh, another fun book that I read over the years was Being Happy. Right, by Andrew Matthews. I'm telling you. But one thing that's really fun that he shares in there is he shows a picture of a guy who's sitting there with his arms folded on a couch, grunting, I will never be like my dad. And there's a picture above his head just like his dad. Mm-hmm. So instead of focusing or thinking and rethinking about where it is that you want to go, you've actually recited in your brain where it is that you don't want to go. So can you share with viewers how through repetitious thoughts or continuing to partner with where it was that you were going, not where you didn't want to go, how that inevitably resulted in success?
Man, that's a great question. Because it's funny, as I learned to ride a motorcycle, I've raced cars, and one of the things they tell you to do is don't look where you don't want to go, because if you look where you don't want to, that's exactly where you're going to go.
That's right. That's right.
Look through the curve, look where you want to go, and it will somehow, it's crazy because you think of like, well, if I just look, why is the car going to go there? But it does.
Uh-huh.
You know, and it seems like that's kind of what you're talking about
Yes, yes.
a little bit. And man, man, that's a great question. There's has to be examples in business. I'm not, the one's not coming to mind, but you know, wow. Um,
Okay, so you're a rider. You just said you ride motorcycle. You've ridden motorcycles, okay? My
sure.
husband's a rider as well. He has a BMW. I'll probably slaughter this. It's either a 1200 or 1600, whatever that is, okay? And with some more letters attached to it. It's a really nice bike. But when he got his first BMW, our children graced him with a chunk of money to get his BMW, and then we had to kick down some more money. But in his mind, he walked out. Were he ever to go down on a bike, this is what he would do. He just played it out in his mind, right? He's a thinker. You ask him something, let me think about it. And then I've had to learn to wait 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 days. Okay, I've let you think about that a few days now. Could you please come up with a decision, right? But he's a thinker. So about 4 or 5 years ago, he was driving down Barber Boulevard. You're from the Portland area. He was driving down Barber Boulevard, and Bambi's mom came out.
Mm.
Hit her, just hit her. And he and the bike separated. But because he had walked out in his mind, this is how I would handle this kind of situation. He literally moved his body in a way that he knew how he had to move his body. He was not wearing the shoes that he needed to wear. He was not wearing the jacket he needed to wear. He had on a vest. And if you saw pictures of these things, you would say there is no way he was going 50 and hit a deer. You would say there's no way. It was a miracle because within the same week, 2 people died on motorcycle accidents. The same week, right? And so how, have you learned to prepare your mind for successes or failures, right? Like, almost like the 2 lists that you said, right? Here's a list, right? There has to be mental preparation before you step into certain things. Otherwise, you wouldn't be prepared. And you would just kind of like just be this man who meanders about. And that's not you. These are important things for people to know.
Sure. Man. You know, I mean, you start talking about that, and it's, I remember a quote is, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Because if you're sitting there practicing the wrong thing, you're getting really good at the wrong thing.
That's right.
I think that over the years, I do game plan things. It's not that I'm flippant and just walk into situations and, hey, there's no good decisions, no bad decisions, just make it good. And it's just relation. It's not as flippant as that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where I call them shower thoughts.
Okay.
And all of a sudden I've taken a 25-minute shower and I haven't moved because my head's just going. Where you're thinking through different things, you're challenging your own thoughts. Again, you can't go into these internal thoughts thinking you figured it out and how you're going to convince others that your idea is right, as much as it is just the game planning and being open to different directions and different thoughts and challenging yourself. So there's a lot of that goes, into my world on a daily basis. But like I told you, I don't sit and reflect a ton, which allows me when I go to bed, I know, like, I'm very organized. I know where everything is.
Yeah.
I know that I've put as much effort into it that I can that day, and I know where it all stands. So I'm not worried about, all these loose ends and where these things are. I look at my wife. My wife will start 50 things and they'll all be 10% done. And I'm like, does that ever drive you crazy? She goes, all the time. And I'm like, okay, good. We used to have two, when she was working, we used to have a big, U desk in our office, and there was like a DMZ line that her stuff could not cross that DMZ line. And it was just like World War II on her side. And I'm like, do you ever lose stuff? And she goes, all the time. And I'm like, thank goodness. At least, so there was a lot of, there's a lot of game planning. There's a lot of organization. There's a lot of ability to seek to understand. You're doing those things on a daily basis. But in business, I don't, there's not a lot of practice, perfect practice. It's not
Yeah,
like when I was playing basketball where you go
yeah,
and you shoot a bunch of free throws. Um, but it's very much of, I think that seeking to understand is such a huge element
yes,
in my maturity, my growth, that you're willing to game plan something, but then go in and willing to not have those horse blinders on, not think that you have all the answers. Um, and I think that as you repeat that over time, and you're aware of your EQ and all these things, that you get better at being patient, you get better at taking a diversity of thought. I think that that's a huge part in it, right?
yeah, absolutely, 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 and that's good, and because it takes all the variables in order to make it balanced and succeed. It truly does, because you can't have everybody. You can't have a room of people with all of the same strengths. You can't,
Oh, for sure.
because then
No.
you're not. There won't be any balance in any kind of company. Um, so I really thank you for deciding to come onto our program, onto our
Oh,
broadcast
absolutely.
today. And in the bottom of this video, there'll be contact information in how to get a hold of Ryan. Um, and you did say that, you know, I just want people to get ready, because there are going to be people that are seeking down the business minds of wisdom carriers that are going to want to tap into what it is that you guys are displaying. So get ready, Ryan. Okay. And so for all of
Sounds
our
good.
viewers, I just want to say thank you for coming to this episode of Sagionic 1027. And until our next broadcast, may the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon me. Blessings. Bye.